Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for the first SEWSA 2021 plenary session titled Hip Hop, Identity, and the U.S. South, a conversation with Drs. Regina Bradley and Aisha Durham. My name is Dr. Tangela Searles, and I am an instructor and undergraduate director in the Department of Women's and Gender Studies at the University of South Florida. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers and facilitate the Q&A portion of today's plenary. And so we're going to do this webinar style where we'll only have our speakers with their pictures up and their audios off, and then we will manage the Q&A portion of today's plenary via the chat. And so with that, I will go ahead and I also ask that folks stay around to the end because I have an announcement that I like to make. And so with that, I go ahead and like to introduce you all to our speakers for this afternoon. And you'll also find their bios in the chat as well. Alrighty, so we have Dr. Regina Bradley. Dr. Bradley is an alumna Nasir Jones Hip Hop Fellow from the Hutchins Center at Harvard University, Assistant Professor of English and African Diaspora Studies at Kennesaw State University, and co-host of the critically acclaimed Southern Hip Hop podcast, Bottom of the Map, with music journalist. Dr. Bradley is one of the foremost authorities on contemporary Black culture in the American South. Her expertise and research interests include post-civil rights African-American literature, hip-hop culture, race, and contemporary U.S. South and sound studies. Dr. Bradley is the author of Chronicling Stankonia, The Rise of the Hip-Hop South. Stankonia, I love it. It explores how Atlanta, Georgia hip-hop duo Outkast influences the culture of Black American South and the long shadow of the civil rights movement. Dr. Bradley is also the editor of a collection of essays about Outkast for the University of Georgia Press titled An Outkast Reader. A prominent public voice and leading scholar on Southern hip-hop culture, Dr. Bradley's work has been featured on a range of news media outlets, including Washington Post, NPR, and Atlanta Journal-Constitution. As a complement to her scholarship, Dr. Bradley is also an acclaimed fiction writer. Her short story, Beautiful Ones, was a 2017 Pushcart Prize nominee in short fiction, and her other stories have been featured in Obsidian, Transition, and Oxford American. She's currently working on her first novel, Reluctant Ancestors, about the disappearance of a teenage Black boy in Southwest Georgia. So, round of applause for Dr. Bradley. I don't know if we have like those clap emojis and all that other platforms have.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and next we have Dr. Aisha Durham. Dr. Durham is an associate professor of communication and a former Fulbright Hayes faculty fellow at the University of South Florida. Her cultural studies research explores the relationship between media representations and everyday life in the post-era using autoethnography, performance writing, and Black feminist intersectional approaches refined in hip-hop feminism, which she engages in her award-winning monograph, Home with Hip-Hop Feminism, Performances in Communication and Culture, and to edit. This past year, Dr. Durham served as guest co-editor for Departures in Critical Qualitative Research and the Journal of Applied Communication Research for 2 special issues about identity and culture. To democratize knowledge, Durham writes public scholarship for Asterix, a journal of literature, art, and criticism, and provides cultural analysis for local and international news and entertainment outlets such as Tampa Bay Times, Complex, Haaretz, and T, the New York Times Style magazine. Round of applause for Dr. Durham. So glad to have y'all here. I'm so glad that SEWSA, the organizing committee, asked me to facilitate the Q&A. And so without further ado, I'd like for us to go ahead and jump right in. And since this plenary is going to be a conversation between our 2 speakers, I thought I'd just get us started with the very broad question of, tell us about your research and how it fits in with the hip hop identity in the U.S. South. So then that way you all can go in whatever direction you like to go in, and so that we can all be blessed by your brilliance. And so I will.
Oh, thank you, Angela. Hey, boo. You look so good, Aisha. I'm still good girl, skin popping, using that Fenty.
I'm trying to be like you. I had to put on makeup for this.
You know it's real when you put makeup on for the Zooms.
Right.
I'm just saying, you look so good. It's so good to see you.
You too.
Trying to love on you through the screen, so to speak. Mwah. Okay, that's my sister. This is my sister, my friend. This is my ride or die chick. I want you to go first because, seniority first. I'm only middle management.
Look at you. Well, I guess the general question. So one of the things that came to me this morning, I mean, I could give you just the regular kind of CV kind of thing, but I thought to say the names. And since you are also writing about, this ancestral way in which we come to understand the South as a kind of haunting, but also a remembering, I thought I'd start off by saying Betsy, Hannah, Sally, Annie Mae, Bessie Ann, and Sharon May.
Ashe.
These are the mothers that birthed me, that brought me here to talk about the South. And when I'm talking about the South, I'm talking about North Carolina, and I'm talking about Virginia. So this is the kind of spirit of, even as we're talking about hip hop, I want us to understand hip hop as a generational construct as well as culture. And that's one of the ways in which I didn't know at the time that I was talking about a kind of generational understanding of hip hop. I grew up, my brother, we shared this little tiny room in public housing project in Norfolk, Virginia. And I still say to this day that I am the rhyme to his rhythm, because as he was mixing and creating and being the DJ for the neighborhood and for the city, I thought that I could rap, but my rhyme was better without a beat.
I love that. I'm feeling it. Yeah.
And if you think about many of the MCs, if you think about when you ask women in particular, how do they enter into the space of hip hop? It is through poetry. And so poetry becomes one of those ways in which I access hip hop. By the time I was writing as a journalist, a teen journalist for a local newspaper, I was writing about a charismatic, a teenager who was mixing Biggie and talking about like God. And this is before Kirk Franklin. And I said, what is happening here? There's something that hip hop is transcending all genres, but it's also informing how we see the world. One of the things that I thought early on was missing is not just talking about cultural products, but the people who make up the culture. And again, coming from public housing, class was an important aspect of that for me. So a lot of what I talk about, I mean, even when I was trying to pitch the book early on to some editors, they're like, yeah, but where's the music? And I'm like, I'm talking about the life that the music is talking about. And one of the things that I wanted to emphasize, and that I still emphasize to this day, is the culture. Again, not just the cultural byproduct, but the actual culture. And I think, Regina, that's what you do. Your prose is poetry, and you love us.
Go, girl, go.
And you love us, because I know when I mean, without Joan Morgan, I wouldn't have anything in terms of talking about hip hop feminism. But I also know when I went to all of these conferences, whether it was in New York or whether it was in the Midwest, they, still are like, well, what you got to say? And I just know it was one person that I could count on. And I'm talking about as a grad student at the time, and that was Joycelyn Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
Joycelyn Wilson was talking specifically in terms of hip hop from a Southern perspective, and so it was a lonely place. And then we got all of this, and I'm telling you, from Red Clay Scholar to this moment. I hear echoes of all those mothers that I just said in your work, and it is beautiful. It is beautiful to be able to, because so much of the ways in which we talk about hip hop is only in this kind of present. Only in this present, when there's so much remembering that happens in hip hop culture, and I think that you bring that together across genre. And I'm just so thrilled to be in communion and in fellowship and having this conversation. So that's when and where I enter the conversation about talking about hip hop as a generational construct, by talking about the people who make up the culture, and always having that idea of remembering as a part of how we might talk about hip hop.
I mean, how long used to go after that?
Oh.
No, I'm serious. I'm like, yo, yeah. I mean, since you're naming people, I'm gonna start naming people. Sarah Pearl, Angeline, Sarah, Mary, Clara, Eugene, Eugene Senior.
I know that's right.
You know what I mean? Damn. Yeah, I just feel like, that thing of hip hop in the present. I just wanted to be like hip hop in a particular people's present. Let me just, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, okay, if it happens in New York, or if it happens, you know what I'm saying? And folks from New York are like, Gina, do you hate us? I'm like, no, I don't hate y'all. I just hate that y'all are
I just love me.
I just hate y'all, you know what I'm saying? And I feel like, when hip hop really takes root, but I'm country. So when hip hop really takes root, the rut, when it takes root, it as the young folks say, it hit different. You know what I'm saying? So when, I'm a military brat, you know what I'm saying? My mom was in the Navy, and, we moved around. So I was in Northern Virginia, Alexandria, Fort Belvoir, you know what I'm saying? When I was when I turned 13, and this is when I was really starting to get into hip hop. And it was the age of the East Coast, West Coast beef. It was Bad Boy, and you know what I mean? And I was like, clearly I'm in Virginia, so I have to be like West Coast, you know what I'm saying? Even though, like, I loved it feels
different. It's
I had my social life to think about, Dr. Durham, okay? So everybody else was saying they was East Coast, so damn it, I was East Coast. And then, I moved to Albany, Georgia. Albany, not to be confused with Albany, New York. Albany, in Southwest Georgia. You know what I'm saying? I'm bringing my little mixtapes with me. You know what I'm saying? And my little mixtapes got everything that's on Hot 97 or on the little mixtape. And I come down. You know what I'm saying? And I come down, and I'm like trying to find my niche. There's a lot of things working against me. I'm the new girl. It's the end of the year, and we're about to start high school in a couple months. You know what I'm saying? So it was like, all right. And I get down there, and I'm like trying to share the little music. You know what I mean? And they like, Shouty, why? That ain't nobody listen. Like, I'll never forget one of my, he was like, Shouty, ain't nobody listening to that shit. And I was, you know what I'm saying? What the hell? So I go home, and I mean, from 93.9 WYS to 96.3 WJIZ, you know what I'm saying? And the radio tape game. I have one tape. I wish I still had it. It might still be at Nana Boo's house, but there was one tape that was like, it started with like Wyclef Jean and all of these, and then it ended, like it cut off abruptly, and then it went to 3 6 Mafia to the club up.
Yes.
Couldn't go to nobody's club. But damn it, I was gonna tear it up. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, that's when all the women get off the floor.
That song, and also Southern Hospitality by Ludacris. You hear those first couple beats come in, and you're like, listen, if you're gonna stay, you're gonna have to be ready to hold your space. You know
Exactly.
what I'm saying? But it's like, you know, kind of like what you were saying. It was like, you know, having these conversations, you know, especially when I got to graduate school. So shout out to Dr. Portia Mosby. I mean, like, Black women were my entry point into hip hop. In hip hop studies, you know what I'm saying? So Portia Mosby, you know, the GOAT, you know what I mean? You don't talk about Black popular music studies unless you reference Dr. Mosby. And she had her hip hop section, and I was like, all right, then. So I'm reading like Mark Anthony Neal, and I'm reading, you know, Becky Ramsey and Trisha Rose and Joan Morgan.
Exactly.
And I'm like, yeah, this is brilliant. Obviously, this is brilliant, but that ain't got shit to do with what's in my car at the moment. You know, because I was in Indiana, and Indiana ain't had no Popeyes. They ain't had no urban radio station in Bloomington. You know what I'm saying?
Bloomington. I used to go to Bloomington just to get out of Champaign when I was in Illinois.
Why would you? Did you go for the winery? It had to be for the winery. Was it for Oliver Winery? You know what I'm saying? Listen, it was. You know, I'm listening to all my old stuff from college, from undergrad. You know what I'm saying? And then Dr. Mosby is like, "What are you gonna do about it?" And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just trying to get about this class. And then as I got older, you know, or older, and as I continued in my career, there were all these conversations about New York and Cali. And I'm like, but I'm from Georgia.
Right.
Outside of the perimeter. I'm not from Atlanta. I don't never claim to be from Atlanta. You know what I'm saying? That's not my identity to claim.
Right.
I am a down South Georgia girl first. You know what I mean? And a PhD second. But it was like, you know, there was no conversation about region in hip hop from a complex and nuanced perspective. If you heard about the South, it was always from this very flat, stigmatized, you know what I'm saying? Oh, those poor Black folks. Which when you were talking about, like, we're always remembering, it made me think about, like, you know, when folks from the South understand this, right? It's like when you live in the South, especially as a Black person in the South,
can't escape it.
It's cyclical. Like, we never just have one thing happen and then that's it. You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, this shit happened. Okay, a couple of years, maybe some decades ago by, but guess what's coming right back up, right? So it's like that fight to establish the South's agency in these popular academic spaces is the same conversation that Zora Neale Hurston was having with Alan Locke and Richard Wright.
Exactly.
Right? It's the same conversation that, you know what I'm saying, Outkast was having. Like, yo, when Andre was like, the South got something to say, you know what I'm saying? He didn't say Atlanta got something to say. He didn't say that, you know, it was the South. You know, there was a recognition that we are this huge, complicated space. So Chronicling Stankonia, I'm not trying to give you a biography of Outkast. I'm not trying to, you know what I'm saying? It's more so a theorization. This is a theorization of how you can use hip hop to understand some of these major moments that are happening in the culture. And that's the one thing I wanted to holler at you about, though, because I feel like, you know, and you were talking about, you know, Joycelyn Wilson and, you know, all these folks and journalists kind of carved this space for us as academics to actually have this type of conversation. But I'm wondering, you know, if you think about region and rap, and I feel this in my own work too, do you feel like we have to not be academic? Because I feel like if I would have came at Chronicling Stankonia from a strictly academic, it wouldn't float. It would just sink. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like that's one of the things that stands out about a lot of us that study the South, you know what I mean, is that our personal voice introduces this component of agency that academic.
I'm gonna claim that for like Black feminism and Black feminist thought, period. The idea of democratizing knowledge and being able to say what you have to say in multiple forms, I think that's hip hop first, but I think that use of the personal is hip hop, right? That use of the social I and that personal I is hip hop. But I think I'm not gonna say that it's not academic, but I can tell you the first, and it remains the only anthology in terms of hip hop feminism I did because I went to a conference Joe Morgan was there. Gwendolyn Pugh was there, who eventually was on my dissertation.
Woody from the block.
Yeah, Dr. Elaine Richardson was there, and I said, this is urgent. We need to do something. We need to put this stuff together because people don't, they're not taking, women's voices or women's contribution to the culture seriously. Mm-hmm. And then Gwen came back to me and was like, yeah, let's do this book. I'm like, I'm going to do a book. I'm in grad school. Like, I'm supposed to be doing this thing called a dissertation. Mm-hmm. I remember my advisor at this time saying, this is not going to be seen as academic. And I said, the work is the work, and this is life's work. And again, if I'm saying that I'm a Black feminist, and hip hop feminism is a aspect of Black feminism, then it is always political. Mm-hmm. It's always political, and it's always thinking about the aesthetic. So, nobody is saying that Audre Lorde's essays are not academic. We study that as a body of looking at how to theorize the body in a larger, quote unquote, body politics. So I said, I'm going to use the same language that's already established. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to say that this is not academic, then you got to cross out every Black feminist and every gender women's studies class, especially by women of color. You got to X that out too. Mm. So if you're not willing to throw that away, you can't throw away my voice. So it was in that space that I tried to talk about a genealogy. Like, this ain't coming from nowhere.
Right.
This is generations of Black women's theorizing, mm-hmm. and theorizing using the personal. So I don't apologize for using that voice, and I'm saying again, you do that so well, because even in my own code switching, I'm just like the word. I mean, some of my stuff just got the stew. I just wanted to sit there, and when it come together, it come together. But the beauty that you take care with the words, and you can just see even in the speech patterns, the syntax of your sentences. It's like you get it, and you hear it, and you're able to put that in a way that we know that it's real and it's beautiful. And so when I say you love us, that is exactly what I mean. And when I say you call on other mothers who have already carved this space for us and talking about hip hop, that's exactly what I mean.
I mean, game recognized game, Aisha. You know what I'm saying? It's not like you don't do that in your work either. I mean, like, some of y'all crawled so I could run, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? So, like, you and Joan and Gwen, aka Trap Queen, and yeah, I mean, like, you know what I'm saying, Dr. E, all of these, like, I think that there needs to be a realization, and I feel like that's part of my aesthetic as a hip hop scholar, is community is so important. You know what I'm saying? And community, and showing up for community, and using your voice to articulate this particular type of communal experience is still looked down upon in the academy. But then I have to remember, like, I'm not supposed to, like, the academy wasn't made for me. Like, I'm not supposed to be here. You know what I'm saying? All these folks who are making these interventions are taking down the academy, Ivy Leaf by Ivy Leaf, brick by brick. You know what I'm saying? The tower needs to fall. You know what I'm saying? Because the tower is not, it's more of a watchtower than a sign of privilege. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, when I think about aspects of community, and this is why I want to get your thoughts about, like, how does hip hop help us think about the South is home? You know what I'm saying? Because you like going back home type thing. And I feel like, like that revisitation kind of goes back to what I was saying about the cycle, right? Like, it's you can never get away from it. I mean, part of me felt like I was overly saying that I was from Albany, Georgia. Like, I'm overly saying I'm from the Benny. I'm overly saying I'm a Dallas. Because, like, I was laughing because I was looking at, like, some of the stuff I've written this past couple years. And, like, almost every single opening sentence is, I'm from Albany, Georgia, or a variant. You know what I mean? And I was like, does that take away or nah? You know what I'm saying? But I mean, like, how do we how do we think about ideas of home site? And this is something that Black women in the South really do. So shout out to Robin Boylorn in Sweetwater, for example.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? How that played out. Zandria Robinson in This Ain't Chicago and Chocolate City.
Yes.
You know, we named the brilliance over here. You know what I'm saying? Because if we don't name our own brilliance, it seldom gets named by somebody else. So talk to me about it. Like, you know, what do you think the connection is between hip hop and home in the South?
Look at you getting me questions.
Yes,
I'm like,
questions.
So one of the most provocative things. So one of the most provocative things that I said, and I was like, I'm sure that these are fighting words, but that y'all hear me out. I say hip hop is Southern.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that goes against all of the construction of, you know, thinking about hip hop and its birthplace. But if we think about hip hop is Southern,
Mm-hmm.
hip hop is from the South. It is from the South and it's from the global South.
Ooh, talk to them.
So even if we're talking about the industrial northern cities, we're talking about brown and Black, first generation, or immigrant Black and brown Caribbean folk.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also talking about one generation. So you can't talk about any Midwest. You can't talk about Common. You can't talk about Nas. You can't talk about any of them without going to Mississippi, without going to the South. One generation.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about the very kind of polyrhythms, when we think about the kind of histories, the genealogies brought over, you can't even talk about Compton without talking about the South.
Mm-hmm.
So these very migrations that help hip hop to come to what it is, whether it's East Coast or Northeast, West Coast, it is all coming from this idea of the South. And I think in some ways, hip hop is a way of, you know, it has a haunting to it. And it has a haunting, I think, in the sense that, you know, we're still grasping for something, but even in kind of the haunting, like I said, there's always a remembering. I mean, it's done quite literally with sampling, right? Yeah. Quite literally, there's a remembering with the sample, but it's also in terms of this continued yearning of belonging and this continued yearning of placemaking. And this is, you know, bell hooks all day long, this idea of kind of home place. And I think that what hip hop is doing when the shout out, I'm from here, it is kind of carving a space. And so I think when I say, you know, hip hop is Southern, you can say whatever you want. I'm going to tell you that you give me a person, you give me a style, and tell me that does not connect to some Southern birth of that music genre or even that artist, him or her, or themselves. So in that sense, I come into the space of talking about home and hip hop and in the South with that understanding that, you know, this is the cradle of what we're talking about when we're talking about hip hop itself.
I mean, yeah, you know, shout out to Charlie Braxton. Charlie Braxton says he's like, you know, all music in America started in the South. That is all. But I mean, like when you were talking, there are so many things that are going through my head, right? Is this idea of hip hop is haunting. It's something
I'm getting that from you too. I mean, I can read you some stuff.
But I mean, like, I want to like break that apart because I feel like haunting is still kind of restricted to like a historical or physical space. I'm wondering about haunting. Because I feel like haunting is like Black folks and other folks who ain't white. You know what I'm saying? And like how that idea of spiritualism and escapism impacts how we think about these differing spaces in the South. Because the South's not a monolith, right? Like, I feel like,
how would you talk about it in terms of like, even when you talk about it, you talk about that it's this kind of past and this present kind of working together. I mean, that is the very thing. So how are you characterizing that in terms of the South?
I mean, I feel like, you know, it's interesting because I feel like it's almost like if we think about the memory of slavery for it, right? And that the residual effect. I think about it like a spider web. Like we know it's just there. Like I can feel it. I mean, I can't see it. I can't necessarily know where to pull it off, but I know it's there. That's how I feel about it, right? And because you have these major historical memories that are in place to speak for the entirety of the South, then that does a huge disservice in thinking about why folks are remigrating back. Like the thing that I was thinking about when you were talking is, of course, you think about like Isabel Wilkerson and The Warmth of Other Suns, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I also think about the fact that when we, and this is in the book too, is that you have this idea of Southness, right? Which is like a physical locale of the region. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's really restrictive. It's very stagnant. And then you have Southernness because Southernness moves. You know what I'm saying? Like it's mobile. So like physical bodies might have left the South, you know what I mean? But you didn't just leave an empty vessel, you know what I'm saying? I think that's the thing that folks forget. It's like, yeah, yo, people in them from Mississippi, but please believe they bring in their barbecue recipes, they bring in their fish flavor, they bring in their blues, they bring in the juice joint, all these things. You know what I mean? So it's kind of fascinating to me that there is like a regional amnesia when we think about the South as a home space.
Exactly.
So if you're not consistently living in the South or have an active relationship with the South, of course you're going to feel like the South is this hugely traumatic space that Black people, you know, don't have the means if they don't leave, and I'm like, my folks didn't want to escape. You know what I'm saying? Like we didn't want to escape, or what if folks migrated across the South? There's that possibility, you know what I'm saying? But like that doesn't get included in this narrative because it disrupts this idea that the South is strictly traumatic and traumatic.
Yeah, and the South can only exist in static space to talk about the migrations in the production, and it is connected to this idea of capitalist reproduction and in industrial areas, that somehow something is lacking here. And I think we still get that in discussions of hip hop. I mean, you can hear discussions of hip hop where, you know, people are talking about the style, or, you know, I don't understand it, or all exactly but that's still kind of the same sentiment. It's not slick and polished like others, and that those adjectives are the same ways in which we talk about the people in other spaces. So it's almost as if, even though Southern hip hop is hip hop, period. Southern hip hop is hip hop, period. But you know, there's still not a recognition of all of the contribution that Southern hip hop has made that predates even Outkast, which you know as well.
Yeah, I mean, like trap. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, you have folks like Tip who are saying, "Oh, I started trap." No, sir, you ain't started no goddamn trap. Like you branded trap. You know what I'm saying? When you came out in trap music in 2003, you branded trap. You know what I'm saying? You ain't started, because if you started it, then what was UGK talking about in Pocket Full of Stones in 92, or Kilo Ali talking about with cocaine, or you know what I'm saying? So I feel like we're in a moment now where Southern hip hop studies, because we claiming this shit, right? Like there are folks who do Southern hip hop studies. We're in a reclamation phase at the moment, which is hella feminist at the same time, right? It's like we're trying to reclaim these narratives, these experiences from the perspective of people who respect it and probably also experienced it. You know what I'm saying? But I mean, like that makes me kind of think about this other question I wanted to ask you is, so we're in this spot where, you know, we think about hip hop feminism. Shout out to Lady J, you know what I'm saying? And she's like, I need a feminism that fucks with the grays, right? Yes. And I'm wondering, like, because the South is a gray space historically, socially, culturally, you know what I'm saying? What does that look like? What does hip hop feminism look like when it takes root in the South? So we have examples like crunk feminism, you know, crunk feminism, right? You have graduate students like Aderia Johnson, for example, who is working on Dirty South feminism. You know what I mean? And I'm real excited about that. Like, I'm like, hurry up, girl. I need to know what you're going to do with that. right?
Nice.
But I'm curious, right? Like what role do you feel like feminism plays in how we articulate the dirty South? Like I feel like that's the element that I touch on in Chronicling Stankonia, but I'm gonna spend a lot more time with it, you know what I'm saying, in the second book project. But yeah, I'm just curious, like where do you feel, you know, this idea of hip hop feminism fits into articulating the dirty South?
Yeah, I mean, crunk is very, very important. But if I wanted to really just say it, I think it's the idea of like contemporary blues women, and that's going to Angela Davis. And the reason why I say that is because, you know, there's a defiance. There's a defiance and respectability. There's an acknowledgement of, you know, the secular and the sacred, the banal is present, but it's never without having the spirit there. So there's that that connects. Again, that goes to the idea of Southernness, not only into the U.S. South, but this is also in terms of the Caribbean as well. Because when we think about a lot of Caribbean artists, especially coming into hip hop, it is that same kind of infusion of the sacred and the secular, looking at the body, inviting us to look at the body in all of its kind of rawness, but it's still connected to the spirit. And I think that is something that is wholly different in other regions. And I think that's also why we still have in the back and forth of not really understanding what is happening in terms of hip hop feminism. But where I'm from Norfolk, Virginia, it is different. Norfolk, and if you say Norfolk, you're not from Norfolk. So Norfolk, Virginia, is very different in the sense that it's not Atlanta. Where I grew up, I mean, on Saturday you could listen to, or even Sunday you could listen to hip hop in the morning. Then they played gospel, and then it was reggae hour, and then they played go-go.
Yes, go-go.
So this was all in one space, and it was because we were surrounded by. Norfolk State is 5 minutes away from where I live, right over the bridge. Then you have Hampton. So I'm surrounded by this, but this also means that culture travels, mixtapes travel, and it's also one of the lay spots of I-95 Cocaine Lane. So this also is a drug space, but it's also a space military. It's Norfolk Naval Base. So you also have all of these different kind of sonic cultures kind of integrating. So it was not uncommon to know go-go from northern DMV, from northern Virginia. It was not uncommon to know reggae, specifically in terms of dance hall. And that's what you hear when you hear someone like Pharrell. I say I'm from Missy Land. Hey. And so that the very kind of, you know, mixture sonically that you hear Missy's music, that is the space, because it is elements of Northeast, but there's elements of Southern culture as well. And, you know, the phrase mid-Atlantic is still Southern, especially Tidewater. I went to school in Richmond and they were like, girl, but you really from Norfolk? Y'all sound like y'all from somewhere else. And I'm like, I'm not saying fitting or fixing. They're like, I don't know about you. So, but Tidewater is a very particular place. And I think, you know, when I see LaKaylee, for example, when I see LaKaylee 47, I think LaKaylee is the embodiment of what we understand as hip hop feminism today. Like LaKaylee exists because Missy, and I'm saying LaKaylee because LaKaylee, Virginia too, Brooklyn, but Virginia. So when I see LaKaylee, I'm also seeing Missy, and what they do is blur the lines in terms of the spirit, in terms of the secular. They blur the lines in terms of gender, how we look at and understand gender, sexuality. So I think in some ways, you know, that the kind of blurring of those boundaries and doing it defiantly, I think we still have that, and I think some of the best examples come out of the South.
Yeah,
today.
my mom was stationed in Norfolk, so we live in
All
Virginia
right.
Beach. That's why I know how to say it right.
All right. Something in the
Norfolk.
water.
Something in the water in Norfolk. But yeah, I think, I don't know, man. I just feel like, there needs to be a reckoning with the role of feminism in the Southern space in terms of hip hop. So many of your women MCs is coming from here, right? Your Megs, your city girls, your mulattoes, you know what I'm saying? But I guess that's the next part of my question, because I know you were saying earlier about, this idea of being defiant, you know what I'm saying? And I think about, and it's really interesting because, my godson is 14 and he's feeling himself. He feels like he knows all things R&B, you know what I'm saying? So we be like comparing notes. If there's somebody, he's like, God, mom, you gotta listen to so, and I'd be like, all right, cool. But I was thinking about it, and I was talking with Amani Perry too. I was like, in high school, I was all R&B everything. But like, I'm thinking back on it, and the ones that I was listening to were from the South. Jodeci was from North Carolina. Ideal was from Houston. Drew Hill is from Baltimore, but they part of that.
They from Baltimore. I don't know. We not
I was in there. 112. I was obsessed with 112. It was kind of like, it was interesting, but then, the hormones really turned on, and that's when Southern hip hop was telling me about like what sexual freedom looks like. So shout out to Trina and Gangsta Boo and LaChet.
Exactly.
Right, you know what I'm saying? And so I guess, my question is, as somebody who was raised in the church, I was raised CME, you know what I mean? Wasn't raised Baptist. Baptist folks scared me when I was younger. So like my friends would invite me to church.
Well, Pentecostals would really scare you because I was
So Kojic and I, like, they would invite me to, it's like, because I feel like that's a Southern thing. Like, you invite your friends to the church on Sunday. So, friends would come with me to church or my little friend, you know what I'm saying? Because you don't have no boyfriend, you always have like a little friend. So my little friend and my friends, you know what I'm saying? And they come to my church and they be like, Gina, it's so quiet in here. Like, so then I would go with them to church and it's super loud and folks is catching the spirit and falling out. And I'm just like, it's too loud for me. But on top of that, it's like, being raised in that particular type of environment, you know what I'm saying, there was just taboo subjects and sex was one of them. So it was like, I either listened to my music, you know what I'm saying? I had the little box under my bed that had all the explicit stuff in there, you know what I'm saying? But it's like, it's either listen to the music or don't know anything about it at all, right? Like, this is a conversation that I have with my women students in my Survey of African American Lit class, because we read Zora Neale Hurston, right? And she's like, Granny loses it. She's like, you out here kissing them, but what? I mean, like, it was part of like the commandments. You don't kiss no boys. You don't look in no boys' direction. You don't hug no boys. And it was Jack because my two best friends, who are still my best friends to this day, are male. You know what I'm saying? Or male identified. And so they're like, I'm like, but that's not my friend. You know, I didn't get it. You know what I mean? But then it was kind of like, oh, okay. But there was such a terrified response, and a lot of that, going back to this idea of remembering that you so brilliantly pointed out, is like, from my grandmother who came up in the Jim Crow South, sex was weaponized. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm saying? She's carrying that same trauma that her mother and her mother's mother, you know what I'm saying? And more than likely her mother's mother's mother, who was enslaved. Okay. So it's like, in the South with Black women and enslaved Black women, you know what I'm saying? There is no language to articulate sexual trauma. So how do you avoid sexual trauma? Right. Well, you try to avoid anything that sexualizes you at all. The jacked up part about it is we live in a world where it don't matter what you do. It don't matter how much you know what I mean? You cover up. It doesn't matter how many times you go to church. It doesn't matter all of these, how educated you are. You will still be sexualized in a way. And with Southern hip hop, it's an intervention. I think it's not necessarily an easy intervention or a ladylike intervention, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do we think about sexual emancipation, sexual freedom?
I want you to answer that.
I asked you a question.
I'm telling you. I'm saying, because in some ways, listen, I'm closer to 50 than I am to 14, for real. Not, I mean, even closer to 30. So at this point, when I am, even the very people that you name, like I literally have to, it is not a part of my everyday. So if, except for LaKayla. I mean, LaKayla is everything right now. But I literally have to do what I felt like people who are not in the culture would do. Like, oh, that person, let me look up this person to see what's happening. And I mean, and it's not, and I'm trying to remind myself when I'm talking to my students, like this is this is also generational, because a large part of hip hop is still connected to popular culture, which is youth culture. And so I have to think to myself, I remember, those times. I look at pictures of myself and I'm like, wow, if social media was then, I don't even know if I could be a professor. I couldn't be a professor.
I'm gonna just put it out there. I'd be out here like, if they didn't, that one time.
I am glad of that for myself, but I think about that in terms of some of the arguments I make, because there's also there's a class element to talking about feminism and sexuality that I just don't think that we can shy away from. I want us to be able to talk about freedom and liberation that is not solely connected to sexual freedom. It is as though the only way that we are allowed to imagine freedom is through sexuality. And I'm saying that is important. But in some ways, it might not get us out of the very confines in which we find ourselves as already hypersexual beings. And this is not to say that I'm being like, I'm engaging in respectability politics in the right way that it was discussed in terms of being able to be in the public square and have redress. But I'm saying that we have to also imagine other possibilities and other ways of thinking about liberation that extend beyond, because women who are from working class or so-called underclass that I was, I tried to put on the clothes and the pearls and all this stuff. It didn't matter, because at the end of the day, they were like, where you from? You from Diggs Park? Oh, you one of them hood rats. So, I mean, I was in college. The person was like, oh, you from that place? Ooh, I don't know if I should take you home to mama. So there's still a class element to how we think about who gets to express sexuality and sexual freedom, in the sense that, I could do this and I can go home and be somebody else. When, ordinary, everyday Black and brown girls don't have those kinds of choices. So when we are doing the celebration, I want us to always have like that kind of context of who is liberated, and who are we, and how are we imagining freedom? Because my freedom cannot just be imagined through a sexual freedom. It is important, but it's not the only way. And I think in some ways, the way in which, in terms of representation in music in general, it is channeled through that space to talk about other things, but it's channeled through that space. And I just, I want to have different modes or different kinds of expression. And there are artists who do that from the South. Rhapsody is one of those persons.
I just want to say real quick, because I know you have to do Q&A, Tangela. I know. But real quick, I feel like one of the reasons I feel that hypersexualization and sexuality is such a prominent feature for Black women and brown women in the South is because we don't have access to actually naming it as such, right? Like, I feel like the other part of it that's important, and then I'm gonna shut up, is in the same way that you were talking about, we need different modes of liberation. You know what I mean? Until folks, part of that liberation, at least for me, in that definition, is being able to identify and acknowledge the trauma that's associated with it. You know what I'm saying? And we're still fighting to acknowledge the trauma. Megan Thee Stallion is still fighting to acknowledge the trauma of being shot by a fuck boy who thought that because she ain't want to holler at him, let me scare her a little bit.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I just feel like
Yeah.
in addition to the hypersexuality aspect of it, like the autonomy of it, part of that autonomy that I think we need to also consider is that it's also an opportunity and a privilege, like the privilege to recognize you are hurt.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's still
Yes.
something that Black women, girls, Latina women and girls are still fighting to just be recognized that I can be a victim.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I can be traumatized. So yeah, I just feel like all of that said, the music is a space to acknowledge. It's a space to reckon. And hopefully, and this is the feel like the direction that we're going is also a way to heal. You know what I mean? So yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm ready.
Right. I was just in y'all's Amen Corner the whole time. So I'm going to go ahead and give y'all a round of applause and jump right into this Q&A session. We have a few questions in the chat, and all of them are addressed to both of you. So have one answer it. So the first one is, why do you think there's still a lasting resistance to autoethnography even in feminist and queer disciplines?
Well, because if you use a personal voice, that means that you have to recognize where the personal voice is coming from, and folks ain't ready for that conversation a lot of times. You know what I'm saying? Because it makes them uncomfortable or it doesn't happen to them. Like, it's one of the things that really kind of pisses me off about being in the academy, especially when I'm trying to talk about these particular type of experiences that I have, is that if it's not a universal experience, then it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Universal is just code word, right?
You know what I mean?
Just code word.
And then, and
all research is personal.
Every time.
All research is
and if your research isn't.
If you never, all research. Even if you never use I, it is all personal. One of the easiest ways to know that it's personal is open a book, even if it's not autoethnographic, and see who they give shout outs to. See how they came to the work. That tells you that it's already personally connected. So I usually say, even if I don't use the I, even if you don't use the I, it is still personal. So I'm just being upfront with where and when I enter, but it is still personal. So I say that in terms of autoethnography, and if we're talking about autoethnography, and because I use it also in my work, I talk about it as a mind mining excavation of memory.
Come on, yeah.
And it is because, like the DJ digging in the crates to find that perfect sample, it is also a kind of mental digging. So we're going through these kind of memory archives in order to create a story. And autoethnography is never just the personal, because African-American communication and African-American culture always treats the I as a social I. The I is not this just confessional singular I. The I is always we, I and I, right? So the idea of autoethnography is also bringing me and all those other women that we just named at the start of this coming with us. So it is the echoing of experiences, and it's experiences to tell something about broader culture.
And just on top of that, since, you want to talk about why there's still a resistance, I'm going to liken it to this whole renewed interest in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Folks want to use them as spelling words.
For this year.
I'm sorry, you're right. For this year. And I'm thinking, tomorrow marks 1 year since Breonna Taylor's murder. You know what I'm saying? And folks are still arguing about whether or not she deserved it. And that girl was asleep. You know what I'm saying? So it's like we have these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I mean, like, they're buzzwords. You want to get the recognition, but you don't want to do the work. It's the same thing like thinking about the significance of personal voice and ethnography and critical study. You want to do the recognition, but you don't want to do the work of maybe they're talking about you, who makes it hard that their voice is being unable to be heard. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, until folks can get out of their comfort zone, and until folks recognize that just because it doesn't revolve in your world doesn't mean it doesn't exist, we're going to continue to have these types of conversations.
Exactly.
Well said, y'all. And I'm going to read a couple of comments, and then the other question, which I think you all kind of already touched on. So the comment says, love the energy and exchange between the panelists, appreciate the acknowledgement of intergenerational lens and experiences.
Thank you.
The next question, which I think you might have touched on, but you can clarify if you'd like, it says, Dr. Durham and Bradley talk about, I would love to hear Dr. Durham and Dr. Bradley talk about their experiences or challenges doing archival research for their work. And when not finding archives in traditional spaces, how have they created new narratives or memories or embodied archives? So I know Dr. Durham, you talked about excavating memory, and I think that kind of touches on that question, but would y'all like to offer more comments to that one?
Yeah. Hey, Holly, I know that's your question. Your old archivist self. That's my boo. That's my boo. So shout out to Spellman. Yeah, it's hard to utilize archival research when there aren't any archives in place about Southern rap. I mean, you have folks are building archives, which are important. So for me to write this book, there was no extended analysis of Outkast, for example. I mean, you have folks like Imani Perry who writes about them in Prophets of the Hood. You know what I'm saying? Zandria Robinson touches on them in her book, This Ain't Chicago. There are touches and snatches. There wasn't enough for me to create a theoretical framework. So I had to go to my own narrative. I had to go back to my own memories, kind of like what you were talking about. That's brilliant. Like, I just love how it's an excavation exercise. I'm like, in the same, like you were saying, in the same way that a DJ needs to pick out the right song, I had to pick out the right memory. Because I have 50-11 million memories of Outkast and 50-11 million memories of being in Southern rap. You know what I'm saying? But I needed the one to hinge my argument, right? So in terms of creating new narratives and new spaces, I feel like for me, being able to recognize experiences that get overlooked from the archive, you know what I'm saying? Or they're still happening in such a contemporary way that there aren't any archives yet. I'm hoping that the book introduces new concepts of Southernness that can be applied to hip hop to establish this idea of a Southern, of an embodied archive, right? Really like that. And in terms of, you know, the archival part of it, I'm not a historian, but I'm nosy. You know what I mean? Like, one of my favorite things is, and Holly will, you know, she'll tell you, like, before the Pangea, you know what I'm saying? I would be posted up in Spellman Archives looking at Tony K. Pumbaro's papers, or, you know, just kind of like reading through, or going to Emory's Marble Center, you know what I mean? And being all up in Alice Walker's business and James Weldon Johnson's business, you know what I'm saying? So I feel like if folks are able to take archival research and make it humanistic and make it humane, that also opens up new conversations about what the archive can and cannot do. You know what I'm saying? So.
Yeah. I know in my case, I use memory as a counter narrative to the archive. So in my book, in terms of Home with Hip Hop Feminism, there's a whole chapter where I do archival research. I actually look at what I call the prime time moments of my life, 1991 and 1995, high school time for me. I looked at what the newspaper in the area, what they wrote about. It was the most crime-ridden area. You couldn't drive through the neighborhood without possibly getting shot. These were headlines. One city councilman said that these are the most unchurched, yes, unchurched, unemployed, you know, basically the wasteland. And this is how the larger public was to understand where I came from, the people that I know, the people that, you know, loved on me for me to be here. This is what the outside world was saying. So I wanted to use the archive, in this case, the newspaper archive, to provide a counter narrative to what was happening. And I did that performatively by literally creating a kind of performance piece using the headlines from those newspapers. So that was talking about hip hop, but not, again, talking about the people that make up what we're talking about as the culture. But it gives us a way to think about, this is how we are talking about working class black communities. This is how we're talking about people who come from public housing. So it makes sense within a white supremacist framework that then you have people who don't want to go to school. Then you have people who, have legitimate fears of law enforcement. So all of these things, again, normalize within news media that are a part of the public discourse. So I use memory, my own memory, as a way to counter those other archives, to create new ones. And another way that we can talk about an archive that doesn't exist, the same way that we've always done it. Oral tradition. Oral tradition has been a way in which Black folks have carried our own narratives. So a part of that storying as a counter narrative is to talk to people. So I talk to people. So it might not be in the newspaper, but it is still a part of our story. So that was another way to talk about. We don't have to have that archive. We got our own, and it's through our own storytelling and our own memories. And I think, again, I'll say it for the final time, that's what Dr. Bradley does so well.
Okay, I know we're at time, but if you all would please allow me to ask one final question, because it's come from two different people. So this question is, what is one piece of advice you have or you would give to grad students or junior faculty about cultivating and finding your voice in your writing? So one piece of advice you would give to grad students or junior faculty about cultivating and finding your voice in your writing.
Easy. Folks before you sacrificed for you to be able to write. You know what I'm saying? And you have to be courageous enough to speak your truth, because folks before you have sacrificed for you to speak your truth. And if you don't speak your truth because you're worried about rightfully worried about things like tenure, for example, you know what I'm saying? Then that does you a disservice in the long run, because once you get tenure, you know what I'm saying? At least this is what I've heard. Once you get tenure, it's kind of like a now what type of thing, because you checked off all the boxes. And if you're only worried about checking off the boxes, then that's not your voice. That's just you subscribing to what everybody else expects. It's kind of like you have to be willing to decolonize what you think success is and what you think, and how your voice resonates. Because I wouldn't have written Chronicling Stankonia if I was worried about what other people in the English field or in interdisciplinary studies thought. The book wouldn't have gotten written, right? So you have to be courageous enough to speak your truth and walk in your path. Even if folks can't see your vision, even if folks don't understand why you're writing about X, Y, and Z, you know why you're writing about X, Y, and Z, and that's what you need to keep at the forefront. Is you need to speak your truth because somebody before you already paid the price for you to be able to speak it. So you need to speak and write it. That's the best thing I can tell you.
That's beautiful. I would say the same thing. Stand in your truth. Stand in your truth and write you. Stuart Hall has this wonderful quote that I'm not going to recite in its entirety, but basically, Stuart Hall basically says there's academic work and there is intellectual work. The two may have the same, come out the same, but they have different impetus. So one does the work outside of that space. So you have to think about which one are you doing? Are you doing academic work, going back to what Dr. Bradley is saying? Or are you doing intellectual work? Are you doing work that's trying to transform and move something in the world? If that's the case, it doesn't matter what the academy is doing. As I said before, when I was doing the work in terms of hip hop feminism, they were like, and I'm like, this is the work. And this is not just the work for graduate school. This is the work of my life. I'm trying to free myself So I am not invested in these very formulaic ways of even representing. When I tried to pitch it to a publisher, they're like, I don't know. Is it audience studies? You're doing like all these methods. You're writing this way. I'm like, this is what it's supposed to be. And only when somebody was able to see my vision that it went out. But that's the courageousness that it takes, and the kind of also the F you. Like, you don't want it? That's okay. I'm gonna be good. I've been working since I'm 15. I will be okay. So that's the attitude.
Yeah. Are you doing work, or are you doing the work? And if you have to ask if you're doing the work, more than likely you ain't doing the work. You're just working. You know what I'm saying? And folks will, I want to, real quick, I want to shout out the NAP ministry, because the NAP ministry has really just changed my life a little bit in terms of, how I value myself and value the labor that I do and the expectation that I do invisible labor. Like, you need to run me my coins, first of all. But second of all, you know what I mean? I think she said something last week. She was along the lines of, you need to rest because your ancestors couldn't. And I was like,
exactly.
My spirit, like, it was just right. So like, for real, that's the question you need to ask yourself as you're writing. Am I doing work because this is what people expect me to do, or am I doing the work? Because the work will keep you personally sustained. It sustains the ancestors. The ancestors will sustain you. You know what I mean? Because let's face it, sometimes we do work that they don't approve of. And it's gonna collapse.
They don't.
And you're gonna collapse.
They don't. And especially if it's connected to liberation.
Not to them. Yeah.
Love it. Thank y'all so much for letting us go over a few minutes by answering that final question. Y'all have lots of kudos in the chat. I'm going to give y'all another round of applause. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Dr.
Yes, Dr. with the moderation 101.
Because I'm from Macon, Georgia, so every time you were talking about being from
town.
Right. Oh, I love being from Georgia. I tell everybody.
Outside the perimeter, Georgia. Outside the perimeter, Georgia is totally different.
Look, I know, for better or for worse, whatever. I love it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so for attendees, the announcement that I wanted to give before I let you all go is just to remind everyone to check out the SEWSA 2021 PLC Caucus sponsored book session. So the PLC Caucus is sponsoring a book session tonight at 5 p.m. featuring Stephanie Evans and her book, Black Women's Yoga History, Memoirs of Inner Peace. And then afterwards, PLC Caucus is sponsoring a yoga session at 6:30. So definitely come back for those events. Thank y'all again for such a wonderful plenary, a great start to the 2021 SEWSA, and I will talk to y'all soon.
Yeah, y'all be easy, man. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you. Bye.